A cloudburst over Hobby Lobby. Hello and welcome to episode 224 of The Checklist, brought to you by SecureMac. I'm your host, Ken Ray. Clouds. They're not just for weather anymore. Of course, you know that. Cloud computing has gone from catchphrase to fact of life. Happened pretty quickly. In many cases, too quickly. We'll look at a couple of takes on cloud security, then revisit a conversation on misconceptions around the cloud on this edition of The Checklist, brought to you by SecureMac. How many times has this happened to you? You get a coupon to save money on your scrapbooking supplies, and suddenly all of your personal information has been exposed to bad guys. It may have happened to you recently if you got those supplies at Hobby Lobby. According to a piece from ThreatPost, arts and crafts retailer Hobby Lobby has suffered a cloud bucket misconfiguration, exposing a raft of customer information, according to a report from Motherboard. An independent security researcher who uses the name Boogeyman said they had access to customer names, partial payment card details, phone numbers, physical addresses, and email addresses. Quick aside, Boogeyman appears to be a white hat. Says they actually tried to get in touch with Hobby Lobby to let them know what was up, and Hobby Lobby didn't seem interested. Also accessible to Boogeyman were source code for the Hobby Lobby app and the names and email addresses of the chain's employees. 138 gigabytes of data impacting around 300,000 customers, all due to a misconfigured Amazon Web Services cloud database. So this is Amazon's fault? No. If you're wondering who's to blame, you probably have to put the onus on Hobby Lobby. And who knows how many other organizations just like them. Hank Schless, Senior Manager of Security Solutions at Lookout, says it's easy for cloud misconfigurations to happen. He told ThreatPost misconfigured cloud resources are frequently the cause of data breaches like this one. Organizations that have transitioned to the cloud have massive infrastructure that spans thousands of host servers and other services. Amazon's S3 service is the base data storage offering for AWS, which means it's simple to set up and integrate S3 buckets into cloud infrastructure. Unfortunately, that simplicity they offer and the speed at which organizations scale these services up and down oftentimes means the configuration of these buckets is overlooked and the data inside is left exposed. He thinks organizations moving to the cloud have to be sure that they're completely secure, though don't you think they thought they were? Valtix is a cloud security firm. Their CEO, Douglas Murray, told ThreatPost, "The Hobby Lobby incident is the latest example of why we need to take public cloud threat vectors so seriously. In 2020, spending in public cloud exceeded spending in on-premise data centers for the first time. The hackers are doing their own version of lift and shift and are aggressively moving to where the market is going. Just as concerning is that for every Hobby Lobby-like leak that we learn about," he says, "there is another that goes undetected." So, for companies moving to the cloud, not knowing what they don't know is an issue. Cobbling clouds together could be another. I came across an interesting piece in TechCrunch this week, written by Howard Boville. He's the Senior VP of IBM Hybrid Cloud, directing Big Blue's 60-plus cloud data centers around the world. Massive data breaches often lead to debates about which kind of cloud approach is best, according to the IBM exec, but he sees little point in worrying about that. The horse is out of the barn. The debate shouldn't surround which cloud approach is more secure, he says, but rather which one we need to design security for. He argues that InfoSec needs to design for the way the cloud works today, which takes what the piece calls a Franken-cloud approach. When the whole move to the cloud began, Boville says, firms scrambled to take advantage of the cloud while maintaining their systems of record. Similar to how Frankenstein was assembled, this led to systems riddled with complexity and disconnected parts put together. He goes on to say, security teams cite this complexity as one of their largest challenges. Forced to rely on dozens of vendors and disconnected security products, the average security team is using 25 to 49 tools from up to 10 different vendors. This disconnect is creating blind spots we can no longer afford to avoid, he says. Security systems shouldn't be piecemealed together. An organization's security needs to be designed with one single point of control that provides a holistic view of threats and mitigates complexity. Of course, it's worth noting Bovell works for a company that does that kind of thing, and yet you can see his point. Just like Hank Schless at Lookout said that simplicity and speed often lead to misconfigurations, Bovell says cloud's need for speed has pushed aside the compliance and controls that technology companies historically ensured for their clients. Now, those requirements are often put back on the customer to manage. I'd urge you to think of security first and foremost in your cloud strategy and choose a partner you can trust to securely advance your organization forward. Privacy and security can't be afterthoughts, is his argument, and they shouldn't be bolted onto the Frankencloud environment. Our dependence on a diverse set of technologies can be a point of weakness, writes Bovell, adding, it can also become our greatest strength as long as we embrace a future where security and privacy are designed in the very fabric of that diversity. Now, I don't want to leave you hanging on the whole Hobby Lobby thing, though sadly I might have to. The information that was accessible isn't anymore. The chain told Motherboard it has identified the access control involved and has taken steps to secure the system. Okay, the way it was accessible isn't accessible anymore. That much they can say. As for the customers, well, I went to the Hobby Lobby website and the company's online newsroom to see what sort of statement has been issued. If there's been one, it isn't on their site. And that's where you'd expect to find it. Meanwhile, the Motherboard piece says it's unclear whether Hobby Lobby is going to notify impacted users. We'll try to get a handle on the cloud in a moment, but first a word about MacScan 3 from SecureMac. Mac malware is on the rise. I came across a piece in Tech Radar that says macOS malware development surged by over 1,000% in 2020. No, it's not as bad as Windows, but it's not as safe as it used to be. Protect your Mac and your digital life with MacScan 3. MacScan 3 is a great defense against malicious software attacks aimed at your Mac. It's developed by SecureMac, trusted names in computer security and developers of exceptional security software for the Mac for over 20 years. MacScan 3 detects and removes Mac malware, catches keyloggers, removes tracking cookies, and provides full-range or targeted scanning, all without crowding up your hard drive or slowing down your machine. Sign up for a free 30-day trial today at securemac.com/MacScan. Then once you decide to buy for less. You can take a little off the cost of your subscription to MacScan 3 with offer code CHECKLIST. Try it first. Watch it kick those tracking cookies to the curb. Then when you're ready to buy for less with offer code CHECKLIST at securemac.com/MacScan. If the first part of today's show freaked you out about the cloud, it shouldn't. It's not to be feared, but it is to be taken seriously. Last summer, we welcomed Dominique West to the show. She's the host of the podcast Security in Color. She's also a senior cloud security consultant. Let's revisit part of our conversation and work toward demystifying the cloud. So you may have been able to tell from the title of the show, something that we like to do on the checklist is occasionally we do a checklist. That's actually how the show started, where we would have something like 5 things to know, 5 things to do, 5 things to check, something along those lines. So I was really happy to find on your YouTube channel, in one of your videos, the video is called Creating a Cloud Security Strategy with a DevSecOps Mindset. Right in there, there was a checklist of 5 items. And I thought, well, I don't see what else we can do today. In the checklist in your video, and we'll have a link to the video in the show notes this week, the checklist is common misconceptions in cloud adoption security. So I thought maybe what we could do is we could go through the misconceptions, like I'll call them out. You tell us what people are getting wrong, and then, what the truth is around the misconception.
Yeah, sounds good.
Let's start with number 1. The cloud, this is a misconception, the cloud is unsafe.
Yes. I definitely think that misconception comes from just lack of awareness. The cloud was really new for a lot of people, and still is, for a lot of people for a really long time. And once you really understand what the cloud is and the solutions that it offers, and when used properly, the cloud actually is much safer than your typical data center. And one of the main answers is to why is it safer? Because naturally, that's the next question that comes from that is okay, well, if it's not unsafe, what makes it safe? And it's the entire business model for cloud providers is dependent on security, right? No business will move their data to a public cloud service provider if they didn't verify it was going to be safe to do so. Data, like we said, is a gold mine, especially for businesses. So, they're definitely not going to put one of their most valuable assets in something that they don't deem safe to do so. So just like you wouldn't put your money in a bank you didn't trust, you wouldn't, they're not going to say, hey, this is an unsafe place to put something. So the top cloud service provider, Google, IBM, all of them, Microsoft, they definitely have invested so much money into their security to make sure they have up-to-date technologies. They have secure operations centers. There's even a video out there of how do you access a Google data center and the amount of work it takes to even for one of their actual employees to get inside. And it's just, again, I think it comes from a lot of misconceptions that come from not knowing what the cloud is, what you can do in the cloud, how is it different from what I do now. And that fear naturally comes from change. Change can be a little bit scary. But I think, again, once teams and businesses really understand what they're looking to do in the cloud and what benefits they can get from it and do it safely and properly, because I can understand how going into the cloud, you're not sure if maybe you're doing it securely. That is a valid concern. Mm-hmm. But a lot of the majority of the issues that occur really come from just maybe poor security practices. Controls can be a bit complicated. And a lot of times businesses are rushing their migration and technology programs before deployment. So that definitely can lead to a lot of the concerns that I think businesses have when it comes to the cloud.
So then misconception number 2 is almost the opposite of the first one. We go from the cloud is unsafe to my cloud provider will keep me secure.
Yeah. So that comes from the mindset where I've seen where teams tend to deploy thinking, hey, my cloud service provider is a top-notch company. They invest all these millions. So no matter what I do, I'm automatically safe. Mm-hmm. And that's not the case here because there is something called the shared responsibility model. And that is the delineation between what your cloud service provider is going to keep safe for you and then what you're responsible for. So an organization is always responsible for their data, and that requires you, depending on, what kind of cloud model deployment you pick. But at the end of the day, it requires you to do your own due diligence. It requires teams to do the job of making sure you're configuring things properly, that you're taking the right precautions, and that you're making sure that your assets are secure and not relying on, hey, my cloud provider is compliant, so therefore I am. That is a common misconception, and one that will definitely lead you down the wrong path.
At its simplest, I would almost think of it like a U-Haul or a self-storage place, right?
Exactly.
They got 24-hour cameras. They've got, keyed access. They've got all this stuff. You have to work hard to get it inside. But if you then run a locker in there and don't put a freaking lock on it,
exactly.
Anybody who gets in, and anybody can get in because, there are ways that anybody can, you still have to make sure that your stuff is protected inside this greater protected shell.
Yep, that is a perfect example.
Thank you very much. Feel free to use that in your next video.
I will.
Misconception number 3. You need a new team to tackle cloud.
Yeah. So I had put that one because what I tend to notice as a consultant when we're brought in, that teams, the organization's teams, whether it's IT or security teams, a hybrid combination of both, they're not being empowered to do the job in the cloud that they need, right? Now, I know that comes with a whole bunch of factors of probably why a business can't, right? Especially if a business is under pressure, like during this pandemic, where a business is under pressure to meet demand now. Mm-hmm. Therefore, they don't have the time and resources to train up their teams because it does require training. The cloud is a new service and technology. So similar to whenever you install new technology in your environment, you need to do training. You need to make sure you understand what's happening. The same thing with the cloud. So that does require some time for your teams to do so, but not doing so, leaves them in a position where not only do they not feel valued, but they won't know what to do after the fact, right? We're brought in as consultants to perhaps build up their cloud environment, get them started and going, but eventually we have to leave. We move on to the next project, and your teams are the ones who are going to be actually utilizing the cloud. They're going to be the ones keeping track and managing it. They should know how to use this service as well. So I put that there because I feel as security professionals, we don't get enough credit sometimes. And it really is important for businesses to really empower, train, and leverage the teams that they currently have in place, because there are so many people who are eager to learn and they really just need an opportunity to do so.
Misconception number 4, you cannot innovate security.
Yeah, so with innovation, the security industry as a whole has traditionally been side-eyed, and we're always seen as the bad guys, where we're the teams that want to stop people from doing their jobs, or we want to put controls everywhere or safeguards up or XYZ up. And especially when it comes to the fast innovation that comes with the cloud, and in particular with this talk, when I was kind of really trying to show the connection between the DevSecOps industry or DevOps industry, where developers and operations, they've been able to quickly pivot the way they do their production model, right? So DevOps is all about agility. It's all about moving fast, leveraging technology, making sure processes are integrated. And then a lot of the time, security is an afterthought. We're always brought in towards the end, simply because we're seen as a blocker, as a hindrance, and that security would just take too long, for me to properly do security before I need to go to deployment, right? And here, the reason why I brought this misconception up is because security actually leverages and empowers everything, right? The whole point of being in a cloud or wherever it is that you're having data XYZ is you want to make sure you're doing it securely. And yes, I do think the security industry has a lot of reckoning to do with themselves in terms of processes and how we do implementation. But there is a lot of headway being made in terms of leveraging new technology like AI and machine learning, a lot of frameworks, a lot of really good innovation being done within our industry that I just think needs to be more at the forefront in order for us to be included. And I think that just comes with a lot of communication. I think there's a really big lack of communication between security teams and other teams, whether it's IT teams, development teams, operation teams. And I think once we can come to a common ground, we can definitely start to understand each other better, really understand, hey, what's driving us? What's motivating us to get this work done? And like, how can we do this together and really collaborate a little bit more? So I definitely, it's really about just moving from the DevOps or the very siloed mentality that we typically have and really merging everything together.
When you're brought in on something like this, I'm curious, is there, generally speaking, an understanding from the developers on the scene? Because I'm thinking about, I have this one friend who's been a CTO for a couple of different startups, and one of the biggest problems that he had was people wanting him to go faster, but he always came in with security in mind, to the point that they've hired him on before, and he's been like, right, we're going to go back a month now because the way you guys are doing this is completely insecure. I mean, are people, I'm not saying you're coming across, organizations that are completely insecure, but with the places that you go and work, are you seeing people like actually really understanding the need for security, or simply saying they understand the need for security, but we're in a hurry?
A little bit of both. A lot of the times I know it's we're in a hurry. I understand security, but it's more so is how do I do it? Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, again, even in the example that you had said with your friend, if you've already started in the production or you've already started the process, whatever it is that you're starting, if you haven't done it securely, yes, it is going to require us to go back, because now I have to, so to speak, fix what it is that you didn't do. Yeah. So that's why I always try to encourage, hey, security needs to be a part of the process from the beginning. Like when you decide to have these conversations, whatever it is that you're about to do, you're about to spin up a new virtual machine, you're about to start a new product, you're going to deploy XYZ. Security needs to be a part of it from the get-go, because then that'll prevent us from having to backtrack. It will take away all the blockers, because now I'm part of the conversation. I know what's happening. So again, a large majority of the time is that, hey, we've already done XYZ, come bring the security team in, let them take a look over it, and let's find out, what do we need to do? But by that point, they probably have deployment in 2-3 weeks, a couple of months from now. Whereas if I brought security team in from the beginning, I don't have to worry about that. They already know they're not going to block me from my 2-week deadline that has coming up. I can kind of just get the conversation going now, and we'll be good to go. So I think changing that mindset of, hey, let's not bring security as an afterthought. Let's bring them in from the get-go. Let's understand how to do this securely, so that way in the future, we don't need to continue doing this and rolling back a month. I think it just comes from conversation. Start as you intend to proceed is what a different friend of mine often says. Basically, don't think you're going to fix it later, because later's late. And misconception number 5, my on-premises strategy works in the cloud. Yes. So I have definitely seen teams try to use their processes that they do on premise in the cloud. And while I do understand that security implementation on premise and in the cloud definitely overlaps, and there's, security implementation is the same no matter where you go. The cloud just, again, has such an expanded landscape in terms of how many services, the kind of integrations that happen, that it requires you to rethink everything. It requires you to rethink how you implement, identity and access management. It requires you to rethink how I accept devices into my network. It requires you to rethink how, I do DLP, because there's so many doors available in the cloud that you don't typically have on premise. And that's the biggest thing that I think teams need to wrap their head around. It's like, hey, what I'm doing now is no longer what's going to be applicable in the future. And I need to figure out how can I adapt and change and do my job effectively with this new landscape. And again, I think that kind of ties into before when I talked about just security professionals or teams just need the ability to be empowered and trained. They need to be trained on how do I do this in the cloud? How does identity and access management differ from the cloud and on-premise? Okay, once I understand that, now I know these are my options. This is how I can architect things, and this is how I can do it safely and securely. Whereas a lot of teams don't want to put in the effort and the legwork to do that up front. And therefore they say, hey, I'm compliant here. It's just a lift and shift into the cloud. And then next thing you know, they've lost track of where their data is, going, how devices are connecting in, how people are authenticating. And once you kind of lose track of that and you're already in the cloud, it gets really, really hard to rein it in. And then that's when you have to bring in the consultants and experts to really do that job. So it requires you to think differently and come up with a cloud strategy along with whatever it is that you're doing on premise.
If you want to hear more of my conversation with Dominique, the full episode was Checklist 197, Staring at the Cloud with Dominique West. Of course, you can check out her show as well. It's called Security in Color. Overcast, Downcast, of course, Apple Podcasts. I know it's in all three of those places at least. You can search it up through the podcast aggregator of your choice. Hey, if you're looking for more security news and how-tos, the place to look is securemac.com/checklist. There you'll find notes for all the shows we've done, and you can actually listen to all the shows we've done right there as well. It all starts in one place, securemac.com/checklist. If this show does something for you, could you do something for us? Leave a review for the checklist wherever you listen, and please tell other people about the show. That'd be nice. If you have a question you'd like to ask or a topic you would like to hear us hit, our email address is checklist@securemac.com. That address again is checklist@securemac.com. And if you can't remember that, please do remember this. You're listening to The Checklist, brought to you by SecureMac. And we'll talk to you next week.